This is the In Good Time podcast with Nick Lowe and Andrew Steininger. In this episode, we tackle a large group of topics from student teaching to your first job. In part 1, we talk about student teaching. We cover, chronologically, the process of student teaching and lessons that we learned along the way. Joining us is Tony Valenti, educator and alumnus of Elmhurst College.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the In Good Time podcast. I'm here with Andrew, and today we've got a special guest, our very first one on the podcast. This is Anthony Valenti. Tony, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to talk through all these awesome things today.
Of course. Why don't you go ahead and just for the people listening, because Andrew and I spent our first episode talking for way too long about who we are. Why don't you just give everybody an overview?
Yeah, sure. So I am a band director out of Wheeling District 21. I have been there. This is my third year there, and I teach the fifth grade beginning band, the intermediate 7-8 group, and a jazz band there. And it's been really fun despite recent COVID times, but I digress.
Right. All right.
We're excited to explore your expertise, Mr. Valenti.
Oh boy.
So this episode, we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into all of our student teaching experiences and kind of the lessons learned and the things that we think everybody should know about what they can expect from student teaching going in. So let's just start right at the beginning of that student teaching experience. I guess that first day that you get in there, we'll start there. So first off, why don't we just take a second and let everybody know where we student taught at, however much information of that you want to give out, but at least just the school. So I student taught at, it was, oh man, I might forget the names now. Oh, Clarendon Hills Middle School. And I would have student taught at East Leiden, or the Leiden high schools, but COVID prevented me from doing so.
Sure. For myself, I student taught at Cooper Middle School, which is actually where Tony is currently working. That was your first year there, right?
Yeah, that was my first year there.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So believe it or not, no, I was not student teaching with a first year teacher. He was just I knew him, and so I met the band director through him. So that was Cooper Middle School with Cindy Severino, and then I student taught at Hinsdale Central High School, and that's with Matt Karinsky, and then Matt Gakey was the assistant director.
And for my middle school placement, I student taught at Black Hawk Middle School under Bill Winters. And for my high school placement, I student taught at, Lyle High School with Scott Camino. Took a while for me to remember that.
Mm-hmm. So first things first, our initial impressions going into that first day, right? Like think of where was your head like the night before student teaching?
I think if I remember correctly, I actually had the oh no, I forgot where my locker is dream. And I remember like waking up and thinking, all right, I'm about to student teach. Can I please move beyond this stupid dream? But with that whole kind of silly dream thing, I was very nervous going into it. You're excited, nervous, all of these different things, and you're ready to hit the ground running, and then you're kind of also going, oh boy, I hope I can find the bathrooms on day one.
I remember my leading up to student teaching, I felt kind of the same way for about 2 years of my college career. It was just like, I'm ready to take my education and start doing it, right? Versus learning more about specifics about how I'm going to do it. Student teaching basically couldn't come soon enough for me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I felt the same way. I was like, the night before, because I started right in January, I was petrified. Same thing that Nick said. I'm like, I'm gonna get lost in the parking lot trying to get in the building. I might even know how to get in the door. And like it, but similar, but it's just like I know I've been working at that point for 5 years towards that goal, and I was incredibly excited just to actually meet the kids, get working, and just learn what the program was all about overall. And that was honestly probably it was a huge moment, like walking in that building going, I'm not here to observe. I'm actually here to like be a part of the team. It's weird.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned that you started in January. I did as well. And that was, I think, really helpful. So for any, if you're listening to this and you go to Elmhurst College, which I assume most of you at this point probably are, you've got a J term class, and you don't have to do that when you're a senior. And so you have the option of starting early instead of in February. My suggestion would be absolutely, if you can, get in there and do it early, because then you don't have any like assignments or anything for your college side of things. And so you can just solely focus on being a student teacher for about a whole month.
Yeah, and that's actually going to tie in well to almost the next thing, which is developing your relationship with your co-op. But one question before we move on to that. So I think, generally speaking, we all hope that we are prepared for, that first student teaching experience. Before you got there, did you guys feel like you were completely prepared? Like, did you go in thinking like, okay, I know what I'm doing?
I would say, yeah. Well, mentally, no, absolutely not. But like physically, I was like, I knew what I was doing. Like, I know that I've been trained for this. I went through all the tech courses. I went through all the methodology courses. Like, I knew deep down inside that this is going to be okay. Like, I was going to go in there. I was going to do a great job. I was going to do everything at an exceptional level. And like, just like how the university and how any university prepares you for that, it really just depends on your mentality towards it and how you feel. And honestly, like, again, for me, I really thought that while I am utterly terrified that I now am responsible for like 50 plus kids learning in music, it's like I know that I can do that with enough time. It's gonna be a rough start, but I know I can get through it.
I kind of felt a little bit of imposter syndrome, a little bit, where you get to you're thinking about it's coming up, and then you have this thought of like, all right, who decided I was ready for this? Who was it? You at one point you kind of feel like you're ready for it, but at the other time you're like, there's so many questions that you have that you don't have answers to. So I very much felt like that was me right before I started.
Yeah, I actually felt pretty prepared. Like, I was pretty confident going in that I would be able to, especially since it was middle school. Our education level in music specifically compared to a middle schooler is, way beyond, even if you don't know your fingerings on clarinet, right? Like, your education level and understanding of music in general is way beyond anything a middle schooler is going to know, unless they're, a child prodigy, in which case, that's just going to be what it is.
That's a whole separate case.
But now I think when I got in, like my first couple days in there, my attitude, like I was still confident, but I realized that, there was still way more to learn, even from day one, from being in there. So let's get into that first week.
Sure. What was yours like?
I am actually, looks like I'm frozen.
I think so too. While Andrew's kind of frozen, Tony, how about you? First week of getting in there.
Boy, that was 3 years ago. It's a long time ago. No, honestly, the first week there, it was just the kids had just got back from winter break, and I guess myself included. They were super excited. I walk in, and the kids like, who on earth is this guy? Because my student teaching placement there was finalized, I think, like early December, because other things absolutely fell through, and to no fault of the teachers, for no fault of the teachers, that was a district level thing. But I didn't get to go in and meet the kids beforehand, so I was going in absolutely cold. So But the first week was just learning the ropes, having my co-op explain to me, here's how we run things here, here's how we necessarily try to keep things going here, and also a lot of copying music, because if you're not good at using a copying machine before student teaching, I promise you absolutely will after you're done.
Yeah, it's kind of, I did notice that, where it's like, oh, I need something copied. All right, student teacher, this is your woohoo.
It's like, I'm not gonna get up and do that. Gross.
Right. Well, so in your first week, were your co-ops like kind of give you responsibilities and you're teaching right away, or were you a little more of the observing prior to getting in there?
I got to take a look at what was happening for, I think, a day and a half, and then he's like, all right, training wheels off, you're going whether you like it or not. And like, that was, looking back on it, I was like, I don't know. But looking back, I'm like, I was super grateful, because he's like, you're not going to learn if you're sitting here. You're gonna do stuff. Like, that was super helpful. So I did get to like take a look at what was going on, but then after a while, he's like, yeah, you're not sitting here anymore. Have fun. Bye. I'll be in my office if you need me.
Yeah. Yeah, I know with me, my first placement call-up was kind of the same idea, where it's like, yep, all right, you're here, we're getting you involved as soon as possible, teaching lessons, getting in front of the full ensembles, and various things like that. And yes, definitely a lot of copying music.
So my first week student teaching was pretty similar. Definitely a lot of copying. What was kind of cool was one of the practice rooms in the Clarendon Hills music department got turned into my office. So I had my own little office, my own little room, in which I got to help out with student lessons. And Eric Morong, my co-op, actually got me started on that pretty early, both teaching with him as well as just teaching students by myself, which was pretty cool. So yeah, that first week, I definitely, if possible, recommend jumping in to teaching as much as you can right away, especially if you're starting in J term, where you don't have to worry about all types of different paperwork and other academic related things. So you can just focus on getting to know your co-op, getting to know your students, and starting teaching without any restrictions.
Yeah, I think when you're starting off in that first week, when you start watching how your teacher or your co-op teaches, and then start to be handed some lessons, really it was helpful to me to really pay attention to the way that they structured things. So the way that my co-op did it is, we always started with the same warm-up sheet, and it was the CBF scale sheet. I'm going to be honest, I don't remember what CBF stands for. Concert band.
I think it's either Chicagoland Band Festival sheet or whatever. I've been using it for 3 years. I have no idea what it stands for.
Yeah. So there's like, and this is a good. This is good for what I was trying to say. So Tony's been using this for 3 years. He doesn't remember what it's called, and your co-op probably doesn't either. If they've got systems in place, they may have been doing it for so long, it just comes naturally to them. And so it can be hard for them to remember that you aren't part of that system. So as quick as you can, learn, okay, this is what they always do for the warm up. Here's what they do for grading. If they've got, okay, every time at the start of a lesson, the kids are going to do like a check off, and they go to their end of the book, they play something, they get graded on it, those kind of things. And then the way that they teach new concepts too. All right, we're going to take a look at the first two measures. We're going to count and clap it. We're going to make sure you're tapping your foot and all of these kind of things, and then mirror what they're doing. As much as maybe you have your own ideas of, I learned how to teach it like this. That's great, but the kids aren't going to be used to that. So they're not used to the language that you're using and stuff. So, get into the habit of seeing what your co-op's doing and then mirroring that for the kids.
Yeah, the one thing that I have been really starting to pay attention to as a new teacher, and it's something that I started to do when I was a student teacher, is really, well, first off, you have to develop that relationship with your co-op so that you can ask them questions. and you can feel like you can ask them questions like without restriction, right? And that's going to be different for everybody depending on your personality and depending on the personality of your co-op. But the reason that's important is you want to know why they do what they do, right? So it's one thing to just learn a system, which is you definitely want to get those skills in your toolbox, right? Learning how to do things. But you also want to know why they're choosing to do things the way that they do, because those things are going to impact the way that you think about approaching a program. So you're not going to have the same, when you get a first job, you're not going to have the same program that you student taught in, right? So you have to develop that system, either learn the system that already exists or develop the system for the students that you have every year. And it can change every year, what your system looks like. So understanding why you're doing what you're doing. Why would I do this warm up instead of that warm up? Why do they choose to do to structure their rehearsal in that way? Asking those questions early to yourself and then asking those questions to your co-op just speeds up the learning process 20 times.
Yeah, and the biggest thing is like throughout, I guess, the whole 16-week process between both schools, like your co-ops are there ultimately to help you. Like they're there to make sure that you are not going to fall on your face and flounder. Like, so like there should never be a point where you are afraid to ask them questions. Like they have the answers. They've been doing this, odds are, for 10 plus years, assuming you're thinking conservatively on that. Like they are there to answer your question. So if you're just sitting there thinking like, why do they do that? I'm not going to ask them too afraid. You need to reassess where you are at personally with that, because you need to be able to approach them and be able to talk comfortably with them. They might be like completely different personality wise, but that should not matter. Like you should be able to approach them and go, I need to know why you're doing this, because like I want to be able to take this whenever I get my own program. Because the reality is, after that semester's over, it's just you. There's no one holding your hand in the classroom with you. Like it's just you. So you have to make sure you understand what they're doing so that you can take and adjust as you see fit.
Yeah, and one of the things that you just mentioned was they might have a totally different personality. And I felt, I don't know if you guys felt the same. I felt like at both of my placements, aspects of my co-op's kind of personality and teaching philosophy kind of rubbed off on me too. Like when I was at my first placement, is very competitive. The whole nature of that was, okay, we've got like chair placements in middle school levels. We go to competitions, we win competitions, kind of that attitude, which was something that I had not grown up with in my, 5 through 12 band kind of career. And so it was really cool to see that fresh perspective. And I started thinking that way throughout the rest of my student teaching, was very high expectations. And hey, we have this idea, of competition as a healthy, positive thing. And then how can I incorporate that into my teaching at my second placement, and then when I was on my own as a full-time teacher?
Yeah, definitely. I experienced something similar, maybe not necessarily competition related, but with Eric Morong, he definitely is very task oriented with his students. And you can see that benefits the students because they accomplish a lot in lessons, and they end up playing, really, really well. So that's something that was just constantly reinforced, both from him specifically to me, right? He would tell me, hey, I think you need to, get moving a little bit quicker with a lesson, and you don't have to spend as much time talking about the specific thing that you talked about. Just get him to play. But also, just watching him and observing the way that his rehearsals and his lessons progressed continued to reinforce that same point. One thing I wanted to say though is the attitude that you as a student teacher, the most beneficial attitude that you can have going into your placement is try to view yourself as a contributing member of that music department, that team, right? You're not a student anymore, even though you are learning, right? But teachers are constantly learning. We're always students, but we're still always teachers. So view yourself as a professional going in, you have something to contribute to that music education team, and that's going to serve you much better than assuming that you are supposed to be like given something to learn from that experience.
Yeah, I definitely remember points and uh, whether it was a specific rehearsal or sometimes in jazz, where I remember um, Cindy Severino asking me like, "Hey, like, what do you think?" Or this is something that like. She admitted, I don't know everything about jazz, and you just came from college. What did they have you do for this kind of thing? And so yeah, it was feeling valued as a member, and like having things to say, because especially just having been through college, like it's fresh. A lot of those newer ideas or newer concepts are fresh in your head, and feel free to share those with your co-ops.
Yeah, I had a similar experience where both of the teachers in that department, Eric Morong and the other music teacher, they were both percussionists. And admittedly, Eric is very, very well versed on his secondary instruments, which also is another thing highly recommended when you go into student teaching. If you're not already proficient on at least one secondary instrument, you should be working on that daily. Whether that's after school or if you have time during school, just to play some long tones on a trumpet, right? That will help you. But definitely it makes your life 20 times easier when you have to explain something to a student if you just went through that process yourself of trying to learn that instrument. But he relied on me heavily for woodwind based knowledge. They ended up calling me the woodwind expert because neither of them, I mean, obviously they had experience teaching woodwinds because they're experienced teachers. But I had fresh college knowledge in playing woodwinds at a collegiate level. So that made me feel really good that they were relying on me for my knowledge rather than me just looking to them all the time for knowledge. So developing that relationship where they feel like they can trust you for advice or they can trust you with their students, making yourself as useful as possible is going to give you the best educational experience that you can get.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back on the whole, excuse me, the secondary instrument thing, because I can't stress how like significantly important it is that secondary is like, yeah, like the tech courses that we went through, like you spend like 2.5 weeks on like flute and then you move on to the next one, and like that's not enough time. Like the amount, especially if you're an Elmhurst student and you're taking brass tech over J term and you have like a day and a half with tuba, like that's like you need to practice it on your own. The general rule that I followed myself through my student teaching was like, unless I was in a lesson with a student that had my primary instrument, I did not touch it. Like I would, like in rehearsals, I would play like the trombone, I'd play clarinet, I would attempt to play flute. That didn't go so well, but but like I would just pick up different instruments that I'm playing with the students, and like I would always like joke with the students like, all right, maybe in like a week and a half you'll be better than me, which in most cases they were. But it's just playing on those instruments, because like you do not have to sound like a professional. You don't. It's not going to happen. There's no way you're walking out like first chair CSO material after like playing the saxophone for like a minute. Like it's not going to happen. But like you just need to be able to play it and demonstrate and model, and not so much just like, this is going to be weird saying it like this, but you don't have to be better than the kids. You just have to be able to demonstrate it for them, because at some point you're going to want them to be better than you, because that means they're learning and they're improving, if that makes sense.
I think one of the other things that you catch when you are practicing those secondary instruments is you kind of catch the struggles of that instrument, but also what the quick workarounds that maybe you shouldn't be doing, but you do anyway, because you know that your kids are going to do that, like different things. So you catch how to cheat on it, and then how to like.
Yes, I can't agree with that more, Nick. It's the idea that you need to be able to put yourself in your students' shoes. so that when you go to give them instruction, you can see where their mind is going when they're approaching these different things, right? So if I'm learning the flute, I need to know what it's like to not put that flute up and do everything my teacher told me to do and not get a sound, right? Because that happens to 95% of flute players when they're first starting out.
Mhm.
So let's take a second and let's get into where our second placements were and kind of talk about our transition right now that we've had a full first placement. Now we're getting into our second placement, and then we'll come back and talk about our final lessons learned of all student teaching. So I'll just start right away and say my second placement actually didn't really exist because COVID hit right at the end of my first placement, and I wasn't able to hook up with Brian Miller at East Leiden just because of the craziness that ensued with teachers trying to go virtual and all of that. So I didn't actually participate with any students, but I did have an email communication going back and forth with him, just kind of what was going on in there. So I will give general comments, but my second student teaching placement didn't really exist. So
Sure. For me, so I said this earlier, but I'll repeat it. So I was at Hinsdale Central, and that was with Matt Korinsky and Matt Genke. And it was, I had been so excited to work with high school students. And then I got to the end of my middle school placement and it kind of realized, oh boy, these students are about to get a lot smarter. And the closer I got, the more I was like, oh, gee, I hope I'm kind of ready for it. But you are high school. If whenever you teach at your high school placement, it's definitely different, but it's a lot of fun. They're able to handle those higher concept skills and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Going into my high school placement, I was like, I didn't want to leave the middle school because I spent a little over 2 months there. Like when you're somewhere every day with the same people for 2 months, like you grow attached and you don't want to leave. But when I got to the high school placement, same thing what Nick said, where it's like these kids are going to be geniuses, and I don't know what I'm going to be able to offer them. Like how am I going to do anything for these kids? And the biggest thing is like even if you're teaching at a higher level, like fundamentals, those still exist, like the articulation, dynamics. There's no way those kids have it down 100. And be someone who's just trying to figure it out every single day. But as you go on, you same thing. You join the team, you get more relaxed, you just get into the routine, and you create that bond with the students. And then after that, it's over, just like that.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you're developing your those early on relationships with both the co-ops and the students at a high school. With the co-ops, I found that it was very easy. There were more kids just in the room at one time, and so they were excited to have somebody just going over and checking in on even during a rehearsal. Just you're behind the trombones working on different things. But with the students, it's very interesting because two things kind of stuck out to me right away. Is one, high school students have their personalities and friend groups much more defined than middle schoolers do. And so it can be harder to kind of enter into their world because middle schoolers just think you're the coolest guy ever, period. It doesn't matter what you do.
Well, ideally.
Right. They'll never tell you, but they like liking you.
You become more of like an idealistic figure to middle schoolers, right? You're less of a person to them, and you're like the band director. High schoolers are a little bit more close to like colleagues. Obviously, they're not; they're your students, but they're approaching that age where they could be a colleague. In 5 years, right?
Right, and so that brings me to my second point of when you get there, you're going to look at the seniors and you're going to think to yourself, oh, they look like they're ready to be in college, and you've just spent 4 years on campus seeing what college freshmen look like, but there's a huge mental gap there. So even though they look like adults, high school seniors, they have a lot of growing that you have done at that point, but they have not. So you'll realize very quickly that you do have a lot to offer to even the oldest students through that
Yeah,
process.
to speak to this idea that, you know, high school might be a little different because they know a little bit more, right? I it always, whenever I encounter that, I always have to remind myself to think back when I was in high school, right? And think about what you were thinking about while you were in high school, and think about what you thought you knew when you were in high school compared to what you're thinking about and where you're at this moment, right? Even just on a daily basis, what you think about as a teacher and as a professional is
Yeah.
leagues beyond what concerns a general high schooler. So even if that student does know, you know, their scales and knows the things that you're asking them to do, musically speaking, there are a number of things you can be teaching them and taking them to that next level, in terms of being a human musician, right? It's not just about the skill, it's about a whole bunch of other things. Um, so yeah, I think the important thing, actually, one thing I wanted to say is, even though I didn't have this high school experience, I teach high schoolers now. When you're in your placements, it's really important to start thinking about your vision for yourself, for your career, right? Because you start to get a really clear picture of what level of student you best connect with. And this becomes really clear when you start teaching lessons to them, because the language that you use to communicate with students, you will know instantly whether you're using the right language or not. So for example, if you want to talk to fifth graders, the like vocabulary that you have to use has to be lower, or you have to take the time to explain to them what the vocabulary means that you're using. Otherwise, they're missing 90% of what you're talking about. Versus a high schooler, you can give them much more information heavy vocabulary and they'll be able to handle it, versus going a little slower with the younger kids. So identifying those aspects of yourself, the way you feel like you can teach, that you feel comfortable teaching in, but also addressing some of those areas where you struggle, right? Using some simplified vocabulary for younger kids, or maybe pushing high schoolers a little bit more, than you were used to with the middle schoolers, right? Asking more of high schoolers, asking them to do more, to be more engaged, that type of thing.
One of the things that I think I remember one of my high school co-ops telling me, it was at one point we were kind of prepping for interviews, which we'll talk about the interview process later, but he had asked me, one of the things that philosophically he had come up with or realized is whether it's better to be liked or respected. And he asked me, like, what do you think? And I had said, well, respected, because I was like, oh, that's, I can be respected and then I'll be liked. And he goes, well, change the way you're thinking. If you're liked by the kids, they will work harder for you, and respect develops out of that positive relationship. And I think definitely at the high school level, where building those relationships can kind of be hard, especially if you're walking in there and it's your second placement, because they only have like 10, 11 weeks left of school. Like some of these guys are already checked out. So it is better to start off being liked, because then they will respect and work hard for you.
It's all about how you phrase it, honestly. Like, because there's not an exact wrong answer, but it's how you phrase it that really saves you there. Like Nick, how you just said it, like if they like you, they will work harder for you, and then they'll respect you more. That's a good way of going about that.
Yeah, right. The idea of being liked by the kids, for me, and respect, I completely agree with you. Respect is built over time. But the idea of being liked by the kids is not a facade thing, right? It's actually a real thing, the relationship that you develop with your students. And that comes from basically just you caring about their daily life. Hey, X child, clarinet player who sits in the front row, I saw that you were working on this drawing before class. Tell me about that. You know, those little 5-second conversations go miles for you building that relationship with that student. And as soon as they feel like they can trust you and that the information that you are what you are telling them is something that they should know, if they think that, they're ready to learn. But if they think you're there just for because it's your job, it's going to be a harder time.
Mhm.
So let's kind of we're starting to talk about it already. So let's just shift gears and kind of move. So we've kind of covered what that second placement looks like. So thinking more generally now, what are big takeaways or like specific lessons that we've learned from our time at student teaching?
Yeah, I have 4 big ones that that I kind of boiled down. Is the first one is you got to attack opportunities, and attack is a very aggressive word, but what that boils down to is if your co-op offers you to do something, you should make that thing your mission to do it well, because that's an opportunity for you not only to show them that you're capable, but it's an opportunity for you to learn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take all the opportunities you can get. Number 2 is you're not a student anymore, but you're always learning. So just because you don't know something doesn't mean that you're not the teacher, right? But you have to understand that you are the authority figure in the classroom. So you can not know something, but you can still get that respect from your students and show them that you know where you're going and what's going on. Number 3, you got to be playful, creative, and try stuff out. Your students know that you're not out of college yet, and they know that you're not like the big teacher because they have a big teacher already. Um, so the more that you can show them that you're willing to try new stuff out, the more they're going to be willing to participate in your shenanigans, right? If you just kind of go up there timidly and only do what's asked of you and only do what your co-op did, they're not going to look on you like a new person. They're going to look at you like a mini version of their director. And then fourth thing, I've already mentioned this, but you got to start developing that vision for yourself as a professional. What do you like? What procedures did you work well with? Where do you see yourself teaching? What personalities do you click with? For students, like do you work well with students who maybe aren't as motivated, or do you work better with students who are motivated? Those types of things.
Yeah, I could kind of divide mine into uh, 2 smaller categories. The first thing is you're going to learn a lot about technology, and I know I did. Uh, Between how to use like systems like Flipgrid, I started using that at Cooper, and I use that all the time now too. Um, to other things like how to use Google and really getting into like Google spreadsheets and like how to be able to do all that. But then not even just online things, technology like setting up a jazz band from the sound system side of things, or um, getting it to run something to run through a projector to smart board to all of that stuff. Um, and then the second thing is uh, there's a really when you're in that, you kind of get at some point your order of importance of big concepts. The first being rhythmically, the kids have to have a good rhythm foundation, and on that rhythmic foundation is tone quality foundations, and then from tone you extend into intonation. So those are the big 3 ideas if we're kind of making like a pyramid of importance.
Yep.
Like all of the co-ops that I said like talked to all had those 3 big things, is that you have rhythm, and then you get tone, and then intonation being number 3.
Mhm. I guess for me, the biggest takeaways for student teaching were not entirely like pedagogical. It was more like myself as an educator and as a human being in that capacity. And like there's a few things here. The biggest thing is always check yourself before you walk in the room. always like these kids, if something's wrong with you, they know. They will hone in on that, and they will either respect it or make you more miserable, depending on who you're working with. But you got to be able to go in there, and because your first objective is working with these kids. Like, unfortunately, while what we feel is valid at that moment, it really isn't the biggest thing, because like those kids are young. They don't understand the things that we're going through right now. As adults, all the worst thing that happens to them is that their lunchbox like fell out in the parking lot, and now their sandwich is all wet. That might be the worst thing that happened today. Obviously, very, very isolated example. But that's one thing. Always make sure that you are carrying yourself, and making sure that you are just, and this leads to my next point, being honest with them. Be honest with the kids. Like, I believe Andrew said, like, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to own up to the kids when you make a mistake. I make hundreds of mistakes. Like that, anybody who knows me knows that that is a thing that I do constantly. But when I'm in rehearsal, and let's say we're playing like the concert A flat scale, and I absolutely forget to tell them to play an E flat, and like, wait, did you say E flat or E natural? I'm like, yeah, E flat. I was 1000% wrong. Don't listen to that. Like, but own up to it, because like that shows the kids that like, oh, even they can be wrong, and they're supposed to like masters at what they do. It's okay to make mistakes and be wrong. And thirdly, going off on that, make mistakes, because you will not learn if you are not making those mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not a bad thing, and it drives me nuts when people are like, I can't mess up. If I mess up, it's gonna explode. Everything's gonna catch fire. I'm gonna be sad. Like you are allowed to make mistakes. I promise you. Any administrator that walks into your room is going to see that and go, huh, okay. The important thing is, if you make the mistake, how are you going to learn from that so that mistake doesn't happen again? Because a mistake stops being a mistake the second time it happens, and then it becomes intentional and action, and it becomes more and more intentional as you do it each time. So those really were the biggest things, because like we are all human overall. We will not be perfect. No matter, for me personally, I will never be perfect at this job for as long as I'm in it, for the next like 100 years or so, depending on how long this takes.
Tony's going to live to be 120, whatever you are.
If only. I'll be doing marching band until that happens.
Knees give out.
I think the one of a phrase that I heard recently that I think really encapsulates what you should be thinking about as a student teacher is there's either winning or learning. There's no losing, right? Mm-hmm. Either you do something right or you learn from it. And that is and even when you do something right, there's always going to be something that you can do a little bit better to make it more accessible to students, more easy to understand, more challenging for students. There's all these aspects that you can always be focused on. So really, when you get into that experience, you're learning as much as you can, but you're trying to develop yourself as an educational leader, right? Leading those students, showing them that you are just as much of a learner as they are. You just have a couple more years on them, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other kind of closing thoughts that we had on student teaching experience as a whole?
I think I said all I needed to say for now.
Yeah, all I'm gonna say is it's great. Enjoy it. Like, just have fun with it. Like, you'll learn you'll learn a ton. You'll have a good time doing it as well.
Yeah. All right. So with that, thank you all for tuning in and listening to our discussion about student teaching. We're going to be shifting gears for our next episode and talking about EdTPA and all of the trials, tribulations, and eventual reliefs you have.
Oh boy.
So, well, we're excited to be able to talk about that. Hopefully you will tune in and have a great rest of your day.